A small knot of scientists stood before the Galactic Council. The science team was comprised of the galaxy's brightest minds. The crisis team was convened less than a week ago to discuss the current crisis, branding the United Human Empire. A small, stout Lair scientist tapped his Vox translator. The Lair species were a peculiar race, only having 2 thin legs and no scales. The hairless creature, with a slightly crooked neck, standing before me, began to speak, putting his claw to his throat to touch the Vox on his neck. He began projecting his voice so the assembly could hear him. As you are all aware, we have been working on assessing the overall scale of the human empire. Initial estimates placed human colonies in 4 solar systems around their home system. The Lair shifted his weight over onto his other leg, as if to make himself more comfortable, his small belly shifting to the side as he did so, like an oversized egg. The human's home system, called the Milky Way, had an approximate population of 10 billion humans spread across 3 of the planets. Across these 4 solar systems outside of the home system, we suspected 9 billion additional humans. The models we were using were based on what is to be expected. He trailed off as the thick-feathered Slickarian general rose from his chair. His feathers on his back bristled, creating a sharp noise which filled the room. The Vox system in his long neck bristled as well, sending a small high-pitched noise through the output feed. From across the room, I watched his hands clench on the table as he leaned forward on the holodesk. "Spit it out! I do not have time for this!" he bellowed, the whole room recoiling as he did so. The knot of scientists at the front of the room tightened together, and the Lair scientist who had been unfortunate enough to have spoken first cringed as the sound of his voice reached him. My skin crawled, and the tight feeling on my scalp sent ripples through to my bones. Another scientist stepped forward to begin talking, clearly not wanting to anger the general any more than they already had, albeit unintentionally. The Slickarians had caused this. His anger was understandable, but the war between the Galactic Federation and the humans was their own doing. Less than 2 months ago, the Slickarians had discovered a small flotilla of human transports traveling through space. Their space, they hastened to add later on. Citing a territorial infringement, an armada was sent at them. The Slickarians engaged the flotilla, a mixture of what seemed like light cruisers and transport ships, against the heavily armored destroyers and battlecruisers, were no match. The humans didn't have time to react. The well-trained Slickarian forces dispatched the light cruisers with ease, but not before a vessel, likely the command vessel, got off a distress signal. After the light cruisers were dealt with, the Slickarians boarded the transport vessels, slaughtering all those who got in their way. A total of 4 transport ships were boarded, and approximately 6 light cruisers were annihilated in the fray. The transport ships were carrying a mixture of what could be considered food and medical supplies, with a small number of metallic weapons. After the initial ambush, the humans retaliated. A void mining expedition on asteroid 415 was attacked, with no survivors. They had used weapons even the most advanced species had never seen before, weapons leaving radiation readings, and void radiation over everything. Craters the size of battlecruisers were left across the entire asteroid, and huge swaths of asteroid and mining apparatus were left strewn throughout space. The casualties were absolute. 2 million souls were lost in this brutal attack. It took mere minutes for the humans to wipe out communications. As the reports were coming in, huge black spots were appearing in the sensors. A total report of 30 strikes was received before the command center was knocked out, and moments before the power systems failed. Roughly an hour later, life support failed, and anyone who survived the attack died due to exposure to space, a particularly nasty and brutal way of dying. 4 hab stations around the asteroid were taken out. Each station had 8-digit casualties, and transport vessels and other unarmed vessels were left drifting through space. The crew of these ships were found dead hours later. Shortly after the attack, the humans sent a diplomatic mission to the Slakarian homeworld. Adding the Terran language to the Galactic translator has been easy, but throughout the talks, little progress was made towards a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. As communication finally broke down, and the final diplomatic meeting came to a close, a heated discussion, if you could even call it that, about the rules of war began between the human diplomat and the Slakarian diplomat. It turns out the transport fleet they had attacked was a medical fleet, carrying the sick and injured from a recent colony to one of their home planets. They demanded that rules of war be implemented, outlawing attacks on medical and civilian targets, listing many other rules about prisoners of war and munition types which were to be used. The Slakarians laughed in their faces, and the human envoys left angry. Redness covered the faces of most of the human diplomats, and hushed conversations between the humans took place. The diplomats all stood in unison and turned for the door. As they left the room, the humans turned and looked the diplomat in the face. "We came here to discuss diplomacy. Instead, you laughed in our faces. We as a species have rules in war. Now you will find out exactly why we have so many." The Slakarians were not laughing anymore. A somber mood had settled over the room, making me feel all the more uncomfortable. I threw a look to my assistant and turned off my Vox communicator, so I wouldn't be heard by anyone else. "Get our things ready to leave. Send a message to the pilot and get the engine warmed up. This isn't going to end well." With a slight tilt of their head, he opened his datapad. The scientists knew of the fate of the Slakarian Void Station and the mining facility on the asteroid. Whilst the fate of the Void Station had been unfortunate, the short-sightedness of the Slakarians was their downfall. The scientists, I'm sure, felt almost sorry for the Slakarians. They didn't deserve the xenocide that was almost certain to hit, if their calculations were correct. Turning to look at the group of scientists, I watched the front scientist keenly, an unpleasant mixture of eagerness and nausea settling over me. Part of me wanting to hear what they had to say, but another part of me dreading what was about to be said. "In the first incursion, the attack on the Void Station, we had counts of 30 to 50 vessels, mostly small frigates. After the battle, a number of these had been intercepted and destroyed by the Slakarian fleet." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable being the one to tell the general this. "The first fleet that was engaged, the initial conflict point was only a transport fleet, consisting of approximately 10 ships, and the Void Station was 30 to 50. We used an approximate estimation of the population of a galactic planet, which is roughly 1 billion population per planet." The scientist started to fidget slightly, throwing glances around at his colleagues. "However, with additional time to study the current recon of an outlying human planet, we have been able to draw up the more likely estimate. The initial estimate was wrong likely by..." His confidence faltered on the last sentence as he threw a glance around the room, seeing the anger rising in the other glance around at his colleagues. A subtle nod from the one on their left must have given him the confidence to complete his sentence. "Approximately 8 or 9 orders of magnitude, which is catastrophic in the event of the initialization of a full-scale war. We also estimate that the humans are spread across not just 4 to 5 solar systems, but throughout multiple galaxies we have yet to explore." A stunned silence settled across the room, the scientists looking out of place in the front. The hall of high-ranking diplomats and generals from across the council froze, unbelieving what they just heard. The Slakarian general slumped in his seat, the wind being knocked from his sails as he let out a heavy exhale of air. A galactic general called Tshirt turned his wide eye on the scientists. "So what you're saying is the humans are approximately 152 billion. The small group of scientists conferred together for a brief moment, before the Liar scientist spoke. "It's very difficult to give an exact estimate, sir, but I don't want ifs and I don't want buts," Tshirt bellowed, his voice carrying even the guards near the door. It is a very simple question. How many humans are there? The last part was spelt out, emphasizing each word with a heavy thump on the holodisplay in front of him. Each thump to emphasize his point made the holodesk bend slightly, his anger splitting through the murmured discussions throughout the room. My assistant looked up, his finger poised over one of the buttons on his pad. A small crack appeared in his holodesk. The minor cut on Sriaka's hand dripped his blood onto the ornately designed wooden floor. Swallowing deeply, I stood up, turning to look at the scientists, noticing that all eyes in the room slowly swiveled in my direction. How large of a contingent are they likely to field against us with the current estimates? Using a slightly softer tone in my voice, so as to try and put them slightly more at ease, it didn't work. They looked unsure of what I didn't know, but the next words out of the scientist's mouth hit me like an ion cannon. We can't be sure of that, at least not able to be sure enough to provide a good approximation. Great General Shrieker, in answer to your question, we are estimating approximately 200 billion or more. Each planet they have habited seems to have large cities, which reach far above and below ground. However, without investigating each planet on the ground, we couldn't give any more of an accurate answer, aside from that. Furthermore, they continued, the tight feeling in my scales getting the better of me, as stress and irritation started to take hold. Slightly leaning forward, I put my arms on the holodeck to listen more attentively. What we have been mistaking for full fleets attacking seems to be no more than scouting parties occurring from multiple different starting destinations, converging on individual targets to overwhelm our defenses before the main force arrives, if it's needed after. I was quite taken aback by this. Raising my hand, I spoke loud enough to be heard, over the slight din of conversation returning to the room. So you're saying this is a multi-galaxy civilization we have somehow overlooked? Before the scientist could respond, a Slakarian aide opened the door at the back of the room, scurrying towards their table near the front. Tapping the diplomat on the right side, he says something quietly to them. The aide turned to realize all eyes in the room were following his every move and scurried out. The diplomats slumped in their seats. The lead diplomat slowly rose to stand and turned to face the council. Their face looked ashen. Turning his vox set up, he addressed us. Early warning systems in the Slakaria system have detected incoming spacecraft. Preliminary scans show the humans as the most likely form of life on the ships. They are currently estimated to arrive on my homeworld in 4 hours. Early estimations, they are said to have over 200 spacecraft, with more arriving every minute. With that, the Slakarian diplomats and aides stood and left the room. A heavy silence settled. Turning to my assistant, I inquire, "Is the transport ship fired up and ready to go?" He presses a few buttons on his pad and gives a quick tilt of the head. "Good. Prepare to leave." Standing up, I politely notified the room of our departure. I turned and walked out, ushering my council out of the Galactic Federation building. "Contact the humans," I said. My Vox unit working overtime to filter the breathing. A slight trace of panic entered my voice as I spoke, thankfully being hidden by the Vox unit. As we walked up the slope towards the door, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way of resolving this diplomatically. It could definitely be worth a try. Send a diplomatic message. Request to see their leader and discuss the terms of peace. As the door swung shut behind my entourage, a crescendo of voices rose as panic set in throughout the room. Various voices raising, and insults being thrown mostly towards whatever gods they praised. Rushing through the corridor, I noted the scientists leaving as well, themselves in their conversation. Catching the eye of the scientist that spoke, I tilted my head towards him. Talking to my aide, I said, "When the Slakarians fall, we're next on the list." Whilst we hadn't taken part in any of the fighting, we were a close ally of the Slakarians. Emphasis on were. As far as I was concerned, they were on their own. We have neither the economy nor the industry to fight a war of this scale, but it's not necessarily my decision. The cogwheels of government need to get into motion on this, and fast. Also, I thought for a few seconds, as we strode down the brightly lit hallway towards the exit. I remembered back to the humans' request for rules of war. Now seems like a good time to draft some up in the event of a full-scale war. Thinking back to home, I thought of my son and my mate. At least my son will be safe if we sign one. It was a very foreign thought, signing something that seemed so bizarre. No one had ever thought of implementing rules of war. Begin early draft up of rules of war.